What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to do a full story video. A full story video is when I sit down and take a bunch of videos that tell one overarching story and combine them together into one big video. Now, today's full story video is going to be about, the X-Men again, but let me explain. You see, when it came to the X-Men after the Executioner song, it was time to work our way up to Fatal Attractions. And really, when it comes to the X-Men comics, the one that released in 1991, they do play a very important role when it comes to character development, but also leading into Fatal Attractions. And really, one of the story arcs is really important for the character of Colossus, who does play a major role in that storyline. And so I say, you know what? Let's go ahead and combine all the different videos that lead into Fatal Attractions, but only focusing on the X-Men 1991 series that leads into that actual X-Men event. And so with that being said, I do hope you enjoy today's comic book video. What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are going to continue our coverage over the X-Men. And guys, we're working our way up to Fatal Attractions. But first, we got to cover some story arcs that actually lead into that actual crossover. And so today, we're going to sit down and cover X-Men issue number 17, 18, and 19. Now, for me personally, this begins a huge change in the character of Colossus, but also putting Colossus through the ringer. Like, this is only part one of Colossus going through the ringer, because out of the story arc, there are going to be a few more story arcs where we're going to feel bad, very bad for Colossus. And you see what I mean as we go through today's video. And so getting into X-Men issue number 17, we actually pick up with Illyana, the younger sister to Colossus. Now, if you have seen my coverage over the X-Men as we covered the Mutant Massacre, X-Men Inferno, and so on, you would know that this character has gone through a lot. And the reason why I'm saying that, because when she first appeared in X-Men comics, she was a young girl, but then she was pulled away in limbo, and when she came back, she was a teenager. But then thanks to X-Men Inferno, she was turned back into a child again, a young child. Except this story arc is beginning the process of possibly saying, like, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and turn her back into a teenager again, because she had cool power, she's a cool character, so let's try to get her back into that position. Either way, we do see her right now as a young child being very excited about the fact that her brother Colossus is going to pay them a visit, except this visit might be somewhat sad. But we also see that somebody is actually watching her and the family very close. And this person right here is going to bring in a new concept in Marvel Comics, the whole idea of Russia, but also the character of Colossus. But now we pick up with two characters. That will be Darkstar and also Alexei Garnov. Now, these two characters are, of course, mutants who live in Russia. Now, over the years in Marvel Comics, the superhero name for the team in Russia would constantly change. So, for example, at first it was a Soviet Super Soldiers, and then it was Cyberforce, and then after that, the Winter Guard. But I want to say at this point in time, Marvel Comics, they were known as Cyberforce. Now, these two characters were given a task to go to a nearby town. And reason why, because every single person in that town seems to be under some kind of trance. They're not moving, they're not talking, they're just standing there in place, eyes wide open and just lost in some kind of trance. And so you have our heroes trying their best to figure out what in the world is going on. Now, that leads into both characters being attacked separately by our mysterious enemy, somebody who's a very powerful psychic, who's kind of going after their fears and even their sins or their regrets as a way to attack their minds, but to also get into their minds to shut them down. And so by by the time we reach the end of this section, both Darkstar and also Alexei have been taken off the board completely. Now, we're going to see that Darkstar is going to be very important for the character of Iceman later on in this book, and I'll explain why. But now we pick up 3 days after the incident. We pick up with three characters discussing what had happened to Darkstar and also Alexei. Now, out of these three characters, only one of these characters is actually important, and his name is Alexei Vashin, so a different Alexei. Now, this Alexei and the other two guys, they work for different branches in Russia's government, and so they are discussing what's happening in that city at the moment. And the problem is right now, they have no idea who else they can send into the actual city to handle that problem because they got word that Darkstar and the other Alexei had never came back, and that was 3 days ago. And so now they're wondering what can they do to handle this situation. And so you have Alexei say, you know what? I have the perfect guy who would not mind going into that actual city. I'll call in Omega Red. But now we have to jump over to the X-Men. Now, because this book does take place right after the Executioner's Song, you don't really have the initial team of this book. And what I mean is that when it came to Jim Lee and Chris Claremont, when they had launched the X-Men book in 1991, we had two X-Men teams, Gold Team and Blue Team. Now, Gold Team was being led by Storm, and Blue Team being led by Cyclops. But we see right now, we have a small mixture of Gold Team and Blue Team here because you have Cyclops, you have Wolverine, you have Psylocke, but you also have Colossus and Iceman who are usually on Storm's team. Now, they're on their way over to Colossus' parents' home. Now, for Colossus, he has to inform his parents that his brother, they thought had died many years ago, was actually alive, but now he is dead for sure because he had committed suicide a couple story arcs ago. Now, at the same time, we're also getting reminded that Cyclops is still kind of figuring out what went wrong when it came to Strife and also Cable. He wants to know the actual truth of those characters, but at the same time, he's also thinking about Psylocke because he wants her so bad. But at the same time, he's with Jean Grey still. And so once you have our heroes arrive, you have our heroes being very happy to see Colossus being able to reunite with his family. Now, unfortunately, this happy moment gets ruined very quickly because now Colossus has to tell his parents that their older son that they had thought died many years ago was actually alive, is now dead now because he had committed suicide. And so while you have Colossus trying to talk to his family, we see the same guy we saw earlier who was watching Ileana, watching the entire family, and then calls to the colonel and says, hey, my name is Flag Watch 133, and this is going to be really important for the later chapters. Now, we also get an update on the character Rogue. You see, for Rogue, back in the Executioner's Song, she got severely injured to the point where she's technically blind. Not permanently blind, but like, it's going to take a while for her eyesight to actually return. And so we pick up with her and Gambit. Now, this is Gambit trying to build that bond with her, but at the same time also trying to show her that she needs to trust the other members of the X-Men now even more because, well, she needs help moving around the mansion or just flying around the mansion as well. But at the same time, still Gambit trying to be Gambit, trying to get Rogue to fall in love with him. Now, they're being watched by Charles Xavier, and he realized that Gambit does love Rogue, but he's afraid to fall in love with her. But he wants her to fall in love with him. Now, while you have Charles watching them, you then have Beast walk into the room. And Beast want to sit down and talk to Charles about something, but then they are interrupted by, well, Storm, Warpath, and also Cannonball. Now, Cannonball is the leader of X-Force, and Warpath is part of X-Force. Now, when it comes to these two characters and the rest of X-Force, they're kind of on house arrest. You see, in the early days of X-Force, they were that team being led by Cable, who were not technically afraid to cross the line, except when they did cross those lines, well, they were wanted by the law. And so they're now kind of being put on house arrest and being watched over by Charles Xavier and the rest of the X-Men. But X-Force got word that somebody is killing off the Hellions, but also the White Queen, Emma Frost, is currently in a coma. And so for Cannonball, who is the leader of X-Force, but also he was part of New Mutants, and that team there had fought against, well, the Hellions over the years, he's kind of like, listen, even though I hated those guys, someone's out there killing them off, and I need to know why. And also the White Queen's in the coma. And so it's Charles saying, you're under house arrest, but I'll play the role of acting like I had no idea that you left the grounds to figure out what's going on with the White Queen and the Hellions. But now we have to jump over to Tokyo. And the reason why, because we're being introduced to another new character, and this character is Kawanin. Now, this begins one of the most difficult concepts ever in Marvel Comics. Not really difficult, just it was a concept that just ran its course way too long, and Marvel only fixed it in the 2010s. And for me personally, that was just way too long a concept to go on when it comes to the character known as Psylocke. And this is Kawanin. And Kawanin is the woman who's currently in the body of Psylocke. Let me explain. You see, in the 1980s, when you had Psylocke join the X-Men, she was a purple-haired character, Caucasian character, really a British character, who joined the X-Men. But then in the middle of the Acts of Vengeance storyline, Psylocke was kidnapped by the Hand and put in a different body, a body of a young Asian woman. And so the question was, what happened to the old body of Psylocke? Well, now we see that her body is being used by somebody else, a character known as Kawanin, who's now ready to find Psylocke and to hopefully get her body back. Now, we do get a couple of pages where we see Colossus doing some farm work, but not trying to use his powers. Wolverine's kind of wondering like, hey, Colossus, you have the ability to turn into metal and use your super strength to finish jobs very easily. Why are you not doing that? And for Colossus, it's the idea that sometimes he just want to feel like a regular human being and not use his powers at all to finish the task around the actual farm. We're also getting a couple more pages where we see Cyclops still trying to figure out like what is the whole big idea behind Cable and also Strife. Now when he does wake up and try to go in the shower, well, Psylocke is getting out of the shower. And so it's another moment where it's kind of like, will Cyclops actually cheat on Jean Grey to just be with Psylocke? And you have Iceman and Jubilee being able to hang out with Ileana and also with her parents in the kitchen. Now, while they're hanging out, this leads into, well, the big idea of something going to happen down the road for Ileana. Because by the next page, we jump back over to the other Alexei, who's now telling us that after they had sent Omega Red into that city, he had also disappeared as well. Nobody knows what exactly went down in that city when it came to Omega Red. But apparently, their next idea is to use Ileana. That apparently Ileana is the perfect thing they can use to figure out what's happening in that city. Now, for Alexei, he does not want to use her at all. And the reason why, because she's a young girl. But then he said, hey, listen, Flag Watch 133 just called in, and apparently her brother and his friends had just arrived. And so now it's the X-Men probably sent in into the city to figure out what exactly is going on there. And so as we dive into X-Men issue number 18, we actually pick up with Omega Red. Now, this is being used as a way to explain what happened to Omega Red when he had arrived into the city. Well, we kind of find out that he was also attacked by this psychic character. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the actual name of this character, and his name is Soul Skinner. Now, for me, that is a cool name, and unfortunately, this is the only story arc we're ever going to see this character unless Marvel says, you know what? Let's go ahead and use that character again. But for right now, this is the only story arc he does appear. Now, Soul Skinner, going to learn more about the character down the road later on in this video. But we do know that he is a mutant who's able to tap into your mind and make you feel all the fear and the worst times of your lives all at once, over and over again. And apparently, he is the reason why every single person inside the city is just completely frozen, not moving, not talking, just staring out into the ocean because right now they're frozen in time in their minds, just going through all their fears, but also their worst moments in their lives as well. And so for Omega Red, he feels like with him being a primal force, he should be able to take down the Soul Skinner and get the job done. The problem is, even though he is physically strong, he is not mentally strong. The Soul Skinner is that powerful when it comes to his psychic abilities that he was able to shut down the mind of Omega Red and then have Omega Red relive all the worst moments of his life to go through all his fears. And so now we know that Omega Red had also failed in a matter of like maybe minutes as he entered the city to help out the people in that city. But now we have to jump back over to the X-Men, where we do see that Alexei was able to get the help of the X-Men. Now, this is where the X-Men begin to learn the actual secrets of the government of Russia. And what I mean is that you have Alexei say, listen, we have somebody out there watching over a certain mutant for 14 years. Of course, they are talking about Soul Skinner, but something happened to their agent. But on top of that, something has happened to that mutant as well. Now, for Colossus, this kind of builds a whole idea that the government has a lot of secrets involving the mutant race. And sometimes they use the power they have as a government to force people to do things, but lie to folks saying like, hey, you're actually helping us out, but in reality, you're helping us cover our tracks so because this was something that could have been avoided. And you see what I mean as we go into the later chapters. Now, you do have Iceman find out that Darkstar was one of the three characters who went into the city but had disappeared. Now, for Iceman and Darkstar, they had a small moment in time where they were actually in love. And the reason why, because Iceman had joined a team called the Champions. I want to say the 1970s going to the 80s. The Champions weren't really a popular team, but she was there for a brief moment. It kind of had a sweet moment with Iceman. Then she left the team and he kind of like felt really heartbroken. But to hear that maybe she's in danger, he's more down with the idea of going into the city to hopefully find her and actually save her. And so you do have our heroes being able to arrive into that small town. Now, thanks to Alexei, he does tell us that because you had the government watching all the different mutants across Russia, like this one, they know that he is a powerful psychic mutant. And so they have to go in with their A game because this is a powerful mutant who would have the ability to just shut down the entire team of the X-Men, but also Alexei. Now, you do have our heroes being able to find Darkstar and also the other Alexei, but then they're confronted by Omega Red. And Omega Red on himself right now, like, yes, he wants to kill off the X-Men, but this is Omega Red trying to kill off the X-Men for the Soul Skinner, not for himself. Now, we also see that other government officials are actually talking about the idea of still using the red flag. Of course, they are talking about Ileana. But right now, it's kind of like, let's use her only as a backup plan. And even though they hate the idea that she's a small girl and they want to kill her off to stop what's happening in that city, at the same time, they don't have a choice right now because they are afraid of Soul Skinner. They want to make sure the Soul Skinner does not get out of control and try to go out of the actual city. Now, we do see that Masuo is there, and we're getting reminded that Omega Red currently works for Masuo, but he was kind of given over to Russia to kind of help out with the situation. But now he's hearing that maybe he may not get Omega Red back if things continue to go south. Now, we have to jump back over to Kawanin. And the reason why, because like I said earlier, she's currently in the body of Psylocke, of course, Bessie Braddock, but she's currently being controlled by a crime lord known as, and I'm going to mispronounce the name, but Nyourian. Now, Nyourian is a huge crime lord in Tokyo, and apparently a huge rival of the Hand as well. But either way, they have plans to go after Psylocke because apparently she wants to kill her off. Kawanin does. And so, getting back over to the X-Men, we see the X-Men fighting against Omega Red. Now, they're learning that Omega Red is not Omega Red. Like, it's him, but he's being controlled by the Soul Skinner. Now, you have Psylocke trying to use her knife, her psychic knife, on the mind of Omega Red to hopefully free him, but to also stop him from attacking them. But the problem is, Soul Skinner is a more powerful psychic than Psylocke is. So her knife does nothing at all to Omega Red. Instead, it kind of gives Soul Skinner the ability to attack her mind so, well, easily. And so you now have Psylocke being taken off the board. Now you have Wolverine, Jubilee, Iceman, and Cyclops trying their best as well to fight against Soul Skinner. But the problem is that, again, he's just too powerful. And we actually see that he continues the trend to bring out your worst fears, but also the worst moments of your life. Because you have Cyclops being forced to relive all the worst times of his life, like the idea of him and Havoc being pushed out of a plane because their parents were being taken away by some aliens. Or you have Cyclops reliving the whole idea of sending his baby into the future. Or what is the big secret behind Strife and also Cable. By the end of this section, though, we do see that most of the X-Men have been taken out. And the reason why I say most is because Colossus and also Alexei were able to get away because they realized they do not stand a chance at all going up against, well, Soul Skinner. And so we see Colossus and also Alexei being able to get away from Soul Skinner, but they do find a room full of children. Now, this is establishing that when it comes to the children, the powers of the Soul Skinner does not work on them. Now, for Colossus, this is great. For Alexei, it's also great. But the problem is for Alexei is that there are people in the Russian government who are going to learn about this, which means that they're going to use Red Flag 133 against Soul Skinner because she is a child. His powers won't work on her at all. And again, Red Flag 133 is Illyana, the small sister to Colossus. And so it's now kind of saying like, hey, they're going to use his sister against Soul Skinner, but at the same time, they need her to have her mutant ability. Because when it came to Illyana Magic, when she was a young girl, they had no idea she was a mutant or what her powers was. But when she left to Limbo and came back, she was a teenager and she had a mutant ability, being able to teleport by using wormholes. Now, the problem was, though, is that when she was turned back into a child, it kind of seems like her powers are kind of locked away again until she'll be a teenager again and they'll manifest once again. And the question is right now, how are you going to be able to bring the powers out of a young girl if those powers are not truly going to activate until she is a teenager? Either way, we actually see a group of soldiers, or really government agents, go into the home of Colossus, killing off his parents. They grab Liana and say, let's go. We got to use you to save people's lives in this country. So now Colossus has lost his parents. He has no idea that his mom and dad have been officially killed off. But getting back over to Colossus and also Alexei, you have Colossus find out that the government is planning on using Illyana's to basically bring down Soul Skinner. But you have Colossus say, how can you do that, though? Because her powers are locked away until she turns into a teenager. And so you have Alexei tell Colossus, like, hey, the government actually has a way to accelerate her growth, meaning that they're going to age her up so that her powers can come back and then she can use her powers to get rid of Soul Skinner. And so for Colossus, he is technically finding out that the government had grabbed his sister and they are planning on using her to save this small town full of people. Now, this is where we actually dive into the origin of the Soul Skinner because we do learn that apparently he was just your average dude. Like, he was a mutant, but he had a family. But the problem was his daughter was dying. Now, remember, he is a powerful psychic. And so his main goal was to go into her mind to actually ease her pain. But the problem was, though, when he had entered her mind, he only felt what she was feeling when it comes to the idea of dying. And so once he realized what she was going through, the idea of dying, he then found out that his wife was actually a government agent. Now remember, when it comes to Russia, they had different people assigned to watch different mutants across Russia. And apparently his wife was his watcher. So for 14 years, she had watched him. But also, she got married to him. She had a daughter with him. But then their daughter died. And so he got very upset about the fact that with her being in the government, she may have the ability to find somebody in the government who could have possibly saved the life of their daughter. And because she did not do that, he went ahead and killed her by making her relive all the worst moments of her life and all her fears. And that began his path of doing everything to other people in that city. So the reason why he's going around just making everybody feel bad for what they have done in their past is because what his wife did to him. But either way, he tells Omega Red, find Colossus, find Alexei, bring them here or go ahead and kill them. Either way, we got to stop them. Now, I want to jump back over to Colossus and also Alexei because they do get into an actual argument and an actual battle as well. Because for Alexei, he does explain to Colossus that why they need the powers of, well, Ileana back because she has the ability to teleport. And so they're kind of hoping to save the entire city of people by using her powers to, basically get rid of the Soul Skinner. But for Colossus, he's kind of like, listen, thanks to you guys, Russia, the government, I already lost my brother when you had twisted his mind. And now you are talking about the idea of possibly losing my sister because even though this process has the ability to age up Ileana, there's still a huge chance that she could actually die through the entire process. And for Colossus, he would hate the idea of losing his sister. But for Alexei, it's kind of like, listen, does your sister's life matter more than an entire city full of people? Like, there are hundreds and hundreds of people who right now need our help, and you're putting their souls underneath your own sister. But for Colossus, it's kind of like, yeah, I would do anything to protect my sister. I will sacrifice everything to protect my sister. Now, you do have Colossus trying his best to fight his way over to his sister, but let's not forget that for Colossus, he has no idea that the government has killed off his family so that they would be able to retrieve his sister. And so once you have Alexei play the whole card of like, you are a student of Charles Xavier. You understand what it's like to battle against evil mutants. And here we are again with another evil mutant. And so for a brief moment, it does seem like Colossus is actually considering allowing the government to use his sister. But then you have Soul Skinner arrive. And he shows Colossus what's really going on inside the mind of Alexei. And that is the moment you have Colossus find out that his parents have been killed off. But now we have to jump back over to Rogue and Gambit. Now, when we do, we actually see the two characters right now still hanging out. But while they're hanging out, we get the idea that there's something going on with Beast. It really is more with the idea that the younger X-Men like Gambit, Rogue, and possibly like Jubilee, not possibly, she is really young, but the younger X-Men who are not the original X-Men are so carefree. But for Beast, as he gets older, he becomes more concerned about the actual future for the mutant race, it seems. And you have Jean Grey realize that there's something going on in the mind of Beast, and of course, she needs to talk to him. And so you have the two characters decide to talk to one another about his problem. But we got to move back on over to Colossus. But getting back over to Colossus, we have to remember that this man just found out that his parents have been killed off. And so the only person left his family alive right now is his sister. And so for Colossus, he's kind of like, no, I'm killing every single person who was responsible for the death of my family. Now, you also have Soul Skinner trying to use the grief and pain of Colossus to get into his mind. But the whole idea of the grief and the pain that Colossus is going through, but also the idea that he almost used his own sister to stop Soul Skinner, mess with the mind of Soul Skinner, because again, his daughter died. And when his daughter died, that began the whole idea of Soul Skinner bringing pain to other people inside this city. And so basically what's happening at the moment is Soul Skinner now beginning to realize that Colossus is going to do the same thing that Soul Skinner did many years ago when it came to his daughter. Now, here's the catch. You see, for Soul Skinner, he's kind of like, listen, I got to make sure they cannot use Ileana for any other purpose at all down the road. And so he turns on the machine. Now remember, this machine may be able to age her up, but at the same time, there's still a possibility it could kill her off. Now, you do have Colossus being able to tell Psylocke to take all the innocent of all the young children that he found earlier and use that power against the mind of Soul Skinner. And all of that innocence basically shuts down the mind of Soul Skinner, moving him off the board. Now, you do have Alexei go ahead and shoot Soul Skinner in the head to kill him off, and that is why we don't ever see him again down the road in later books when it comes to X-Men comics. Now, really, the book kind of ends on a good note. Well, not really a good note because Colossus did lose his whole entire family except for Ileana, but you do have Colossus being able to rip open the machine that was about to age up Ileana into a teenager, saving her life at the very last second. Now, after him doing that, you then have Wolverine appear. And with Wolverine appearing, he says Omega Red had once again disappeared, which means that right after Soul Skinner had lost control of the mind of Omega Red, he dipped out. And so we're kind of left to wonder what is next for our heroes in the next story arc that we are going to cover. But this What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over the X-Men. And with that being said, we're going to jump back over to the X-Men 1991 series. Now remember, when it comes to our coverage, we are currently working our way up to the good old Fatal Attraction crossover storyline. But before we are able to properly jump into that crossover, there are a lot of stories we have to cover that lead into that crossover, like today's story that takes place in X-Men issue 20, 21, 22, and 23. This four-part story arc is really more about the idea of the whole big mystery behind Psylocke and also Betsy Braddock, or really Betsy Braddock and somebody else known as Kawanin. Let me explain. You see, Chris Claremont introduced this concept called the Siege Perilous. And the Siege Perilous was actually a cool idea. You see, it gave somebody the ability to have a new life somewhere around the world, a new beginning. But there was a catch to it, though. You see, you may or may not remember everything from your past life. Now, with that being said, when it came to Psylocke and the X-Men at that time period, they had to use the Siege Perilous. And the reason why? Because Gateway, another character, had warned them that they might be killed off by a group called the Reavers. And so you have Psylocke say everybody is going to use the Siege Perilous. And so they did. Now, when it came to Psylocke, though, you see, when she did use the Siege Perilous, she did gain a new life, but she also gained a new body as well. And usually that right there does not happen when you use the Siege Perilous. But we kind of find out that there was another character involved in what happened to her. And that would be a character known as Masuo. Now, Masuo was actually a leader of the Hand. And so he found Bessie Braddock, again, who was a British woman, and something happened behind the scenes that turned her into, well, an Asian woman. And so now we're kind of seeing the story telling us what exactly happened in that exact moment. What did he do to her to turn her into an Asian woman? But also somebody else is currently inside the body of the old body of Bessie Braddock. And that is why we have this story right here to kind of hopefully explain everything going on with those two characters. Now, this story does pick up where the previous story arc left off at. And remember, in the previous story arc, Colossus and the X-Men went to go pay a visit to his family. Unfortunately, he had learned that the government was always watching over his family, him, his sister, and his brother, because all three of them were mutants. Either way, it led to a point where Colossus' parents were killed off, and his sister had almost got killed off as well, but luckily he was able to save her. But the problem is right now, she is very sick, it seems. And so you have Charles Xavier kind of sad about the idea that the X-Men, each member of the X-Men, have lost somebody close to them. And so you have Jubilee in the room with him and kind of expressing her own kind of way that she's also sad for what happened to Colossus, because she was there on that mission when his parents were killed off. Now, in our last video for Wolverine, we had learned that for Jubilee, she had just learned what exactly happened to her parents. At first, she thought that her parents were just killed off in a bad car accident, but in reality, they were actually murdered. Now, this story arc does take place before and after that story arc. Right now, though, for Jubilee, she's going to go through a lot in the next few story arcs because she's seeing everybody else losing their loved ones. Now, you do have Charles Xavier wanting to check in on Colossus because, like I said a moment ago, this man just lost his parents in the last story arc. But also, not too long ago, he also lost his brother who had committed suicide. And so for right now, for Colossus, the last person who is a family member in his life is his little sister. And right now, she is very sick. And so for Charles, he's kind of like, hey man, she's been sick for a good while now. Maybe we should possibly do some more work on her to kind of see what is wrong with her. But for Colossus, he does not want the help of anybody at all right now. This is Colossus pushing everybody away except for his little sister. Now let's get into some juicy drama because right after you have Jubilee walk away from Colossus and also Charles Xavier, she sees Psylocke, Bessie Braddock, who's currently in an Asian woman body. But also, she's wearing a very good looking outfit. Now for Jubilee, it's kind of like, where are you going with that kind of outfit? And she's not going anywhere really. Like she's staying in the X Mansion, but she's wearing the outfit to go confront Cyclops with. Because if you see my last few X-Men videos, around this time, Marvel Comics, Cyclops was really thinking about the possibility of leaving Jean Grey for Psylocke. And for Psylocke, she wants Cyclops really bad. And so you have Psylocke go right over where Scott is at and begin to kind of flirt with him a tad bit, to the point where they actually kiss. Now for Scott Summers, he does realize that he just made a huge mistake. He's all like, whoa, I just kissed Psylocke and I'm still with Jean Grey, so I gotta back away. And so he does. But the problem is his mind is still racing because right now he wants Jean Grey, but at the same time, he also wants Psylocke. Now, he was supposed to get ready to go to lunch with Jean Grey, but because what just happened, he needs some time alone. And for Jean Grey, she already knows what is happening. She's all like, hold up now. I know what's happening right now. Y'all are cheating behind my back. And so for Jean Grey, she's very upset. She's very sad. Now, this leads into the beginning steps of us learning more about the actual character Psylocke. Let me explain. You see, you have Jubilee going out of her way to look for Wolverine, and she finds him. But the problem is that when she finds Wolverine, he goes in attack mode. Now, he does not attack her, it's just that he realized something is off because he smells Bessie Braddock. But the problem is, Bessie Braddock is currently inside. She can't be inside and outside at the same time. And so Wolverine, he can't see anything, but he can smell something. Now, Jean Grey, she does use her powers to see what's exactly happening out there, but just like Logan, she truly can't see anything at all. Now, after that, you didn't have Jean Grey just walk away, but she goes over to the Danger Room. Now, when she does, she sees that Gambit and Beast are currently using the place. Now, let's not forget, when it comes to our heroes, the X-Men, they have gone through a lot in a very short period of time in the last few story arcs. And so for Jean Grey, she kind of realized that Beast and Gambit are not using the Danger Room to train. Instead, they're using it to get away from the real world as a way to relieve all that stress they have in their body at the moment. But also, we're being reminded that there's something going on with Beast, but we have no idea what it is just yet. He's having a hard time opening up to the rest of his team. Now, we also get reminded that Rogue got severely injured back in the Executioner song. Now, if you saw my Wolverine video, the one where you had Wolverine and Rogue going over to the Savage Land, it takes place right after this moment right here. And so once you have Storm say that Rogue is okay to go out in the field again because now she can see again, they're going to leave for that next mission. But you also have Storm realizing that there's something going on with Jean Grey. And there is, because right now she is believing in the possibility that she might lose her man Cyclops over to Psylocke. Now for Cyclops, we see him currently packing up a suitcase. He's going to leave the team behind to get some space. And the reason why, because, well, it's not just because of Jean Grey and Psylocke. There's actually more to the picture. The whole idea that for Cyclops, he had a son with Madeline Pryor. And that son was unfortunately infected with a techno-organic virus. And to save his son's life, he had to send that child into the future. But then out of nowhere, you had this mutant known as Strife appear from the future saying that he is the son of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, or Cyclops and Jean Grey in some folks' eyes. Either way, he comes back saying, I hate you guys, and attacks him and the rest of the X-Men. And so for Cyclops, he's kind of like, did I do the right thing sending my son into the future? Because now he is a madman. Now, Cyclops, Cable, Strife, they have no idea that in reality, Cable is the actual son of Cyclops and Strife is just a clone. Either way, Jean Grey sees Cyclops leaving the school and she realized that she might actually lose her man. Now for Jean Grey, her whole idea now is to go ahead and confront Psylocke to kind of figure out, is Cyclops actually cheating on her with Psylocke? Now Psylocke, oh my God, y'all, Psylocke does not care at all for Jean Grey. The girl wants Cyclops and her goal is to get Cyclops because she says, listen, I'm not going to lie to you. I want your man. I want your man to touch me. I want your man to do all these different things to me. And you have Jean Grey getting upset. But the problem is, Jean Grey's not a fighter. Like, yes, she's very powerful, but she does not have hand-to-hand skills like Psylocke has right now. And so you have Psylocke say, hey, you are not going to attack me at all. And so you have Psylocke being able to take down Jean Grey. But right after doing that, out of nowhere, you then have Bessie Braddock in the room, the British version of Bessie Braddock. Now, for our Psylocke, she believes that this is a hologram. And the reason why? Because they're in the Danger Room. But this is not a hologram. This is actually Bessie Braddock, the British woman version of her. And you didn't have Bessie realize that this is a real person once she's able to make a psychic blade, very similar to Psylocke's psychic knife. And so right now, you have our two heroes realize, okay, whoa, we now have Asian Bessie Braddock and British Bessie Braddock. What in the world is going on here? And so then you have all the X-Men in the house at the time run into the Danger Room to see what is going on. They hear a lot of commotion. And when they walk inside, they see Bessie Braddock, but they also see Bessie Braddock, like Psylocke and Bessie Braddock. They're very confused. And so as we dive into X-Men issue number 21, you now have the entire team on edge. Because right now, the original Bessie Braddock, the British woman, is back. And she's saying, hey, listen, that one right there is a fake. I'm the real Bessie Braddock. But at the same time, you have the Asian Bessie Braddock say, no, I'm the real one. But for the X-Men, they're kind of like, who do we believe right now? Because right now, we should believe the British one because she looks like the one we had before this one had appeared out of nowhere. Now, for the Asian Bessie Braddock, it's more of like, no, you should trust me. I've been here for a while. I've been with you guys through so much in the last few months that honestly is crazy that you guys cannot believe me. Now, you have both Bessies wanting to fight against each other, but then you have Charles say, hey, y'all gonna stop right now. This is my house, and there's no fighting in my house. Now, you have Wolverine pull Charles to the side, have a quick conversation with him. Now, this is also the book kind of reminding us that when it came to Bessie Braddock, when she had joined the X-Men, Charles was not around. You see, for Charles, he was in space with his space girlfriend. And so while he was gone, the X-Men kind of were being led by Magneto for one point, but then on their own, and they allowed Bessie Braddock to join the team. And so for Bessie, she really didn't have a cool connection with Charles like most of the other members do, like Storm or Jean Grey or even Wolverine. But you also have Wolverine saying like, listen, I know that right now my nose is not lying, that both women are technically Bessie Braddock, but at the same time, both women are not Bessie Braddock. And so it's kind of like, what is really happening here with the whole idea of who is the real Bessie Braddock? But unfortunately, before we are actually able to have that conversation, we got to jump back over to Cyclops. You see, you have Cyclops paying a visit over to his grandparents who have a cabin or some kind of business out in Alaska. Now, when he goes over there, you have both grandparents feeling bad for Cyclops because they understand that he lost Madeline. They understand that he lost Nathan, but they don't know the actual truth of what happened to his wife and his son. And so you have Scott say, hey guys, I think it's time for me to tell you what exactly happened to your great grandchild and, well, my wife. But now we have to jump over to the Dark Riders. Now, the Dark Riders were actually another group of characters that worked for Apocalypse. Now, when it came to the Dark Riders, they also believed in the same thing Apocalypse did. The whole idea of survival of the fittest. The whole idea that the strong should lead the weak, and the weak should be, well, killed off. And so either way, we see the Dark Riders going after a character known as Mesmero. Now, I'm not really going to sit down and explain who that character is. Just know that for the Dark Riders, they believe that for Mesmero, he does not live up to the whole idea of survival of the fittest. So they kill him off. But they also kill off one of their own. Now, the reason why they kill off one of their own, because that one begins to cough a lot, kind of showing that maybe he is actually sick. And this is another example of the idea that there is some kind of virus out there that is going to attack the mutant race. Now we have to pick up with Shinobi Shaw. Now, Shinobi Shaw is actually the son to, well, Sebastian Shaw. But around this time in Marvel Comics, Sebastian was supposedly dead, which meant that Shinobi was able to take over the company, but to also begin trying to become a huge crime lord in Tokyo's crime, or Tokyo's underworld. Either way, we see Shinobi right now having a meeting with another character known as Neowin. And I really hope I pronounced that correctly. Now, for Neowin, he is actually a crime lord as well. But apparently, the reason why you have these two guys meeting up is to make a deal. You see, for Neowin, he wants his best assassin back, Kawanin. At the same time, for Shinobi, he wants the X-Men dead. And so it's Shinobi saying, maybe, just maybe, we could work together to achieve both our goals. But at the same time, if you help me, I will help you somewhere else. meaning that I know that you are trying to take over the Yoshida clan. Now, the Yoshida clan was actually being led by a character known as Mariko, and Mariko was the ex-lover of Wolverine, but unfortunately, she died a while back. And so now her clan is free for the taking. And right now, Neowin, he wants that clan. And for Shinobi, he says, I can help you get that clan if you want it. But now we have to jump over to an X-Men team. Now, this X-Men team, their main goal right now is to get some answers about the British Psylocke and also the Asian Psylocke. And so currently, we see the whole entire team going over to the home of Neowin. Now, Neowin is the other lord who just made a deal with Shinobi Shaw. But apparently, you have the British Psylocke saying that the Asian Psylocke is actually a traitor, that in reality, her real name is Kawanin, and she is his lord's best assassin. But also, Kawanin is working for Masuo, who is again the leader of the Hand. And so for this X-Men team, their main goal is to come over here, is to get some answers, to figure out who is actually telling the truth. Now, once they're able to fight their way through all the different guards who work for Neowin, when they get into his office, they find this painting. And this painting is, of course, of Kawanin, but the Asian Psylocke. And so right now, for Gambit and Beast, they are believing more right now that the British Psylocke is telling the truth. But now we have to jump back over to Shinobi. Now you have Shinobi having a meeting with another character known as Masuo. Like I said earlier, Masuo is supposedly the reason why Bessie Braddock is right now in an Asian body, but also he is the leader of the Hand. Now, when it comes to Shinobi, he just learned from Game Master that Masuo is allowed to continue on with his plans with Psylocke. And for Shinobi, that is a huge problem. Now, for Game Master, he is actually the leader of a group called the Upstart. Now, the Upstart are a group of characters who play a very sick game. You see, the whole point of their game is that they go around the world killing off mutants. Now, here's the thing. When they do kill off a mutant, they get points for it. But the more powerful the mutant is they kill off, the more points they actually get. And so for Shinobi, he was hoping to kill off the X-Men, every single member, and receive a lot of points for all their deaths. But now, with the idea of Psylocke being taken off the table, that means he can no longer receive points for her death. Now, we have no idea what Masuo plans are, but apparently he has some big plans for Psylocke. But getting back over to the X-Men, you have the X-Men right now still trying to figure out which one's the actual real Psylocke here. Is it the British one or possibly the Japanese one? But the problem is our heroes are then confronted by the Silver Samurai. Now, the Silver Samurai is actually part of the Yoshida clan, the same clan that was being controlled by Mariko, the ex-lover of Wolverine. But also Mariko was the half-sister to, well, Silver Samurai. Now, for Silver Samurai, the only reason why he is protecting the home of Neowin because Neowin promised to save the legacy of the Yoshida clan. And so the next chapter is now going to be our heroes fighting against the Silver Samurai. And so as we get into the next chapter, we actually pick up with Beast being knocked out and the rest of the X-Men team being the ones who have to fight against the Silver Samurai. Now, this battle does last for like a good few pages, but by the end of the section, you actually had Beast being able to get back up and actually knock out the Silver Samurai. Now, after doing that, you have Beast say, listen, I think I may have found the one thing that could finally give us answers behind the whole idea of which one's the real Psylocke, and that is when he reveals the diary of Neowin. Now, getting back over to Shinobi Shaw, we actually see him being able to join a meeting with 3 other crime lords, the biggest crime lords in Tokyo. Now, this group is called the Jigoku Crime Underworld Group. And this group right here, again, are the top crime lords in Tokyo. And so we are continuing the whole idea of possibly Shinobi Shaw joining this organization. But getting back over to Scott Summers, we see that Scott's still over at his grandparents' place. And then we do learn that he has told his grandparents everything that had happened to Madeline Pryor, that happened to his son, every single thing, and the possibility that Strife might be his son from the future. Either way, you did have a knock on the front door of the Summers house. And so you have his grandfather go answer the door. And apparently it is their neighbor. Now you have Cyclops' grandparents introducing Scott to their neighbor. But then their neighbor says, actually, I know your grandson very well. Matter of fact, I met him a long time ago. And he takes his hat off. And this random man has a special kind of symbol. A symbol we only saw on one other person. And that would be Mr. Sinister. But getting back over to the X-Men, this is where we learn what exactly happened when it came to both Psylocke and Kawanin. So, guys, remember, when it comes to the Siege Perilous, it has the ability to give you a new life somewhere in the world. But you may or may not remember everything from your previous life. Now, the only reason why I'm bringing that back up again is because of this. You see, after Psylocke had used the Siege Perilous, she had arrived in Japan, unconscious, but her mind was officially broken. You see, she was founded by Kawanin, and Kawanin is the Asian Psylocke, the Japanese Psylocke. And so when she found Bessie Braddock, she tried to use her psychic abilities on the mind of Bessie Braddock. And then there was a massive feedback to the point where it kind of merged both minds into one, but somehow put both minds in both bodies. And so technically right now, both Psylocks are both Bessie Braddock and also Kawanin. And things get a tad bit crazier because for Kawanin, she ran off. But apparently she was founded by Matsuo, who was able to fix her mind supposedly, but made her believe that she was the real Bessie Braddock. And then on top of that, the other Bessie Braddock was founded by Neowin, who tried his best to work on that mind, but also made her believe that she was also Bessie Braddock. That is just completely crazy, but it only gets a tad bit worse. Because then you have Neowin walk into the room. Now, when he walks into the room, he basically said what I just said. The idea that both women are technically Bessie Braddock and also Kawanin. And so for him, it's kind of like, you know what? I should possibly give y'all more details about what exactly is going on here. But before we are able to get those details, we have to jump back over to Cyclops. And the reason why, because remember, he was just confronted by a neighbor. And so you had this neighbor and also Cyclops walk down the mountain or hill, whatever. And that is when you have Sinister change into his original outfit to reveal his true identity. And so you have Cyclops realize that now he's about to have a conversation with, well, Mr. Sinister. And so getting into the final chapter for today's video, we're actually picking up with Sinister telling Cyclops like, hey man, listen, I'm not here to fight you. I'm not here to do anything towards you at all. Really, I came here to talk to you. I came here to warn you so that you are able to warn the other mutants across the world what is coming. A virus that is going to kill off the mutant race. Now, let's not forget, we already saw a couple of characters who have been affected by this unknown virus, and they are basically dying from it. Let's not forget that a few videos ago, we had Moira Taggart tell us that she saw people who had gotten this virus, and once they do get the virus, they're dead. And so right now, it's Sinister saying, let me tell you the actual origin of this virus. And so really, this is a callback to the Executioner's Song, because in that event, we saw Sinister pretending to be Apocalypse as a way to trick the Horsemen of Apocalypse to work for him to go capture Cyclops and Jean Grey. And once they were captured, he handed them over to Strife. Now, in return, Strife handed him Summer DNA. Now, we do learn that it wasn't Scott's DNA nor Jean Grey's DNA. It was actually Strife DNA. And so we're continuing to play with the idea of the possibility that Strife could be the son of Cyclops and Jean Grey. Either way, once you had Sinister get the container that was supposedly containing the DNA of Strife, he found out there was actually a virus inside. And that virus is now spreading. But that virus is only going after the mutant race, killing them off one by one. And so then, while you have Scott hearing all of this, the Dark Riders arrive. Now we jump back over to the X-Men who are currently in Japan, and we're also continuing the whole idea of supposedly learning more about who is the real Psylocke, or possibly are they both the real Psylocke. Unfortunately, these 2 pages are just teasing the whole idea of giving us that information, because then we have to quickly jump over to Wolverine. Now, if you saw my video when it came to Wolverine, Rogue, and Jubilee going into the Savage Land, that took place right before this page right here. And so we learned our 3 heroes went into the Savage Land looking for somebody. Now, we were not told who they were actually looking for, but apparently Charles Xavier said, I need you guys to go out there to see if that person is out there right now hiding. Unfortunately for our heroes, they kind of got caught up with Sauron trying his best to take over the Savage Land. Now, once they were able to deal with him, you then have Wolverine and Rogue being able to find some clues. And they took those clues right back over to Charles Xavier. And so we kind of find out that our 3 heroes went into the Savage Land to see if Magneto was hiding out there, because in recent videos, we have seen a lot of different clues kind of saying that Magneto did not die back in X-Men number 3. Instead, he is actually alive. And sooner or later, he might reappear and cause more problems for the X-Men. And so the whole idea of him possibly being alive, it scares Charles Xavier. It scares Wolverine. It scares Jubilee. But unfortunately for our heroes, they know they have no choice here. They have to continue to fight on against Magneto once he does return to cause more mayhem for our heroes. But let's get back over to Cyclops, Sinister, and also the Dark Riders. Now remember, the Dark Riders, they truly believe in the whole idea of survival of the fittest. If you're strong, you live, but also you lead the weak. If you're weak, you die or possibly fall to strong, and then you might die down the road. Either way, for them, they want to test Cyclops and also Sinister, because they are talking about some war coming down the road. Either way, they tried their best to fight against Sinister, and guys, let me tell y'all, Mr. Sinister took these guys down easily. I am talking about just in a matter of panels, this man took down the entire Dark Riders group by himself. And so because of that, they now have to follow his orders, because now he showed that he is the strongest and he has to lead the weak. And he says, listen, I'm leaving, but before I go, I want you guys to fight against Cyclops. Later. But getting back over to the X-Men team in Japan, we do learn that they have broken up into 2 groups. The first group being Beast and also Gambit, they pay a visit over to Shinobi Shaw. And the reason why, because thanks to Neerwin, they have learned about everything that Shinobi Shaw is actually up to. The whole idea of Upstart. And so you have Beast and Gambit say, tell the others who are part of the Upstart organization that we now know that you guys exist. And sooner or later, we might pay you guys a visit. And so getting back over to Kawanin and also, Psylocke, they go after Matsuo to get revenge against him for what he has done to their minds. Now, technically, we don't get the chance to get the full idea what went down. All we see is our 2 characters being able to get their revenge for what he has done to their minds. But we have to move on and back over to Cyclops. Now, the ending of this video is going to be really more of us finishing off the whole idea of Cyclops fighting against the Dark Riders by himself. Now, after a few pages, you do have Cyclops being able to actually take down the Dark Riders. Now, once he does that, you then have Cyclops say, you know what, cool, I still hate your guys' guts, because you guys are the reason why, including your boss, but again, you and your boss are the reason why my son was sent into the future, because you guys and your boss gave my son the techno-organic virus. Either way, you also have Cyclops say, it's y'all's fault, the reason why a war is coming very soon for all mutants and possibly everyone else on the earth. For the Dark Riders though, They're kind of like, yeah, we know because we knew what we were doing. And so they disappear. And with that, the book ends on what's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over the X-Men. Now, with that statement, we do pick up with X-Men issue number 24. Now, remember, we are currently working our way up to Fatal Attractions. Now, technically, we already covered the first two chapters of that X-Men crossover. Now, the first two chapters were really more about X-Factor and X-Force. But now it's time for us to work our way into the other chapters that is going to focus more on the X-Men team, both gold and blue team, leading into the moment where you have Magneto do one of the worst things in Marvel Comics history to Wolverine. But before we get to that moment, we got to sit down and talk about X-Men issue number 24. Because right now, the X-Men, they're in the process of grieving. Now, before we are able to actually sit down and talk about the idea of why the X-Men are grieving, I kind of want to jump over to Gambit and also Rogue. Now, for me, this was the moment where you had the X-Men books establish the fact that Gambit would do anything to get with Rogue. And the reason why I'm saying that because there were other moments in the past before this book right here that kind of did show that Gambit did have a huge crush on Rogue and wanted to be with her so badly. But for me, this was the moment right here because you had Rogue and Gambit go on a date. Nobody else is there. Just them two on a date finally. And you have Gambit right now getting close enough to Rogue where he's able to touch her, but also not being affected by her powers. It is kind of like, hey, I'm going to tease you, but also show you that we can still have some kind of physical touch with one another. Because for you, I understand that you may love me and I may love you back, but you want to have that physical touch. We can do that without just kissing. We can do that with me just holding your face with gloves on or holding your hand with gloves on. And so you have Gambit all in her face. And for Rogue, she's kind of like, yo, this is very intense, but like, I like it. And so for me, it was like, hey, this was the moment you had Gambit say, hey, girl, I would do anything for you to be with you. I will risk my life to be with you. But the reason why you had Rogue and Gambit out there on a date, because again, the X-Men are grieving. And the reason why? Because the death of Illyana, the younger sister to Colossus. It was a huge moment for the X-Men to see that young girl die in their home. Now remember, she was affected by the legacy virus. And so you had Charles Xavier and Moira McTaggart just trying their best to find a way to actually save her life. But unfortunately, she had died. And so for Moira McTaggart, she hates the idea that over the years being with the X-Men, she has seen so many young mutants die over the years. Young mutants who were not really able to live a full life up to her age, or at least the older X-Men age like Beast, Jean Grey, and Cyclops. Now, with that being said, we're also seeing the book kind of re-establishing the love between her and Banshee. Now, we had saw these two be a couple in the early days of X-Men comics when it came to our coverage. But when it came to Moira McTaggart, she had ran away from the X-Men back in X-Men issue number 4. And so for Banshee, he tried his best to chase after her, but he lost her. And so for Banshee, he just stood away to give her space, but he was called back home. And the reason why? Because of Illyana's death. It's almost everybody coming together to talk about the idea of the death of Illyana. But also, it's Sean Cassidy saying, listen, I missed you, but I realized you need your space for everything else going on in your life. Now, for Moira McTaggart, she realized that she had made a mistake pushing him away. And so it's her asking him, can you forgive me? And if you do, can we go ahead and start all over again and rebuild our relationship? And he says yes. And so just like that, those two people are now back together once again. Now we jump over to Charles Xavier and Beast. Now the book is kind of reminding us that for the legacy virus, at first, only Charles Xavier and Moira McTaggart knew about the actual virus. For the rest of the X-Men, they believed that Illyana was just sick with the flu, and that was really it. But in reality, the girl had the legacy virus. Now for Cyclops, he had left the X-Men for like 2 books and went back to Alaska where he had ran into Mr. Sinister and had officially learned about the legacy virus. And really, I'll talk more about that here in a moment, but for Charles Xavier, he didn't tell the rest of the X-Men the truth until Illyana had officially died from the virus. And so now you have Beast coming to Charles all like, you didn't ask me. You should have had me in your corner and had me work with you alongside Moira McTaggart to see if I am able to actually find a cure for the legacy virus. Because Beast is a scientist. He should have been there with Charles Xavier, with Moira McTaggart, working through all the different numbers to hopefully find a cure for the legacy virus. But Beast was not there. And the question is right now, if Beast was there, could have they saved the life of Illyana? Now, I want to jump over to Cyclops and Jean Grey. And the reason why, because like I said a moment ago, for Cyclops, he had left the X-Men for like 2 books. And it was a good reason why. Because of Psylocke. You see, for Psylocke and Cyclops, they were kind of liking each other. And for Cyclops, it did seem like for a moment he'll be okay with cheating on Jean Grey to just be with Betsy. But he realized that was completely wrong. And the reason why, because he was madly in love with Jean Grey. And so he said, you know what? I just need a break from both Jean Grey and Psylocke, and went to Alaska to spend time with his grandparents. Now, while out there, he ran into Mr. Sinister, who told him about the legacy virus. And don't worry, I will explain more about that here in a moment. But for Cyclops, after that moment, he came back home and he realized that he should be with Jean Grey, not with Psylocke. And so you have those 2 characters also getting back together once again. Now, I kind of want to jump over to Psylocke, and here's the reason why. See, in the 1990s, it was a huge mess for this character, and let me explain. You see, in the 1990s for Psylocke, originally, she was a British woman when she first joined the X-Men in the 1980s. And matter of fact, there was a brief moment where she had became the actual leader of the X-Men, but she then told the X-Men to walk through the Siege Perilous. Now, the Siege Perilous is a very powerful weapon that has the ability to give you a new life, to start a new life somewhere else. Now, sometimes you'll be able to remember things from your past life, and sometimes you may not remember anything from your past life. And so when it came to Psylocke, when she had went through the Siege Perilous, when she woke up, she was in the body of an Asian woman. Now, for me personally, it kind of felt like Chris Claremont had big plans for Betsy Braddock. But unfortunately, by this point, he had left Marvel and the X-Men books behind. Now, with that being said, in the 1990s, they said, hey, listen, the body of Betsy Braddock is still out there, the British version of her. And so, out of nowhere, you had Kawanin appear. Now, when it came to Kawanin, she was in the body of Betsy Braddock, while Betsy Braddock was in the body of Kawanin. Now, at first, we were kind of left to believe in the possibility that the 2 ladies had just switched bodies and that was it. But didn't realize that that's not technically true. That what happened was that both their minds were put in both bodies. So you have 2 bodies, but 4 brains. That's how crazy it is right now. And matter of fact, you have Wolverine appear saying like, hey, you guys are just 2 ladies with 4 minds put together, because both bodies have the minds of Betsy Braddock and Kawanin. Like I said, it was 1990s mess, and it only gets worse for the character over the years. Now, for a brief moment, we actually jump over to Jubilee. Now, in one of our previous videos, we had talked about the idea of Jubilee becoming very close to Ileana. And so seeing the young girl being happy at first when she had arrived at the school of Charles Xavier to end up being dead a few weeks later, it broke Jubilee because she grew a bond with Ileana. But unfortunately, now that young girl has been taken away from her. She's literally heartbroken. And because Jubilee is so young, it's so hard for her to go through the grieving process. Now, I want to jump back over to Rogue and Gambit. And the reason why, because you still have Gambit trying to risk everything to be with Rogue. But for Rogue, it's more of like, dude, slow your roll, because the last time she was close to a boy, she hurt that boy very badly. The whole idea that if you touch her skin, there goes your mind and your powers, but more your mind than your powers. And you might possibly fall into a coma. And so for Gambit, he realized that even though he can't touch Rogue, there's still other factors that go into a relationship. And so you have the two characters realize that if they want to kind of keep this going, they have to focus on the other factors besides physical touch when it comes to a relationship. Now, I want to jump over to Cyclops, Jean Grey, Charles Xavier, Beast, Banshee, and also Moira Taggart, because you have all our heroes coming together to talk more about the legacy virus. Now, when it comes to the legacy virus, everyone knows about it now. Everyone knows that this virus is killing off mutants left and right, and sooner or later, it could possibly wipe out the entire mutant race. Now, for Cyclops, he got confirmation the virus came from Strife himself. Now, in the 1990s, the early 1990s, for Cyclops, he believed that Strife was actually his son from the future. He has no idea that in reality, Cable is actually his son and Strife is the clone of Cable. Either way, though, for our heroes, it's really Cyclops saying, hey, listen, I ran into Sinister and he told me that he has some kind of deal with Strife. Unfortunately, that deal did not fall through. But on top of that, it was Strife who had released the virus. And so now for our heroes, their main goal is to figure out how to actually tackle this virus before it does possibly kill off the entire mutant race. Now, the last few pages are really more just setting things up for down the road in X-Men comics. So, for example, you have Jubilee and Wolverine kind of continuing to build that bond with one another, the father and daughter bond between the two characters, because it's Wolverine saying it's okay to cry. Like, what you saw happen to Ileana is a big deal. So go ahead and cry it out. And she does as he holds her in his arms. Now, we do get another page where we are trying to establish the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Kawanin, who's in the old body of Psylocke, could possibly be a traitor or somebody who's trying to hurt the X-Men from the inside out. And so right now, you have both ladies just on guard against one another until one of them actually slips up and tells the actual truth about their origins. And the last page of this book is really more of us leading into Fatal Attractions, because you have Cyclops and Jean Grey just going to bed, but being happy about the idea that they're finally back together. And they feel like there's no one out there in the world who could possibly break them up, except maybe one guy might actually have that chance, and that could be Magneto. And this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.